Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending the New York IMAP Invasives monthly webinar series. I'll ask everyone to remain muted during the presentation, but you can feel free to type into the chat. If you have any questions or comments, you can also introduce yourself, your name and your organization in the chat. And there will be an opportunity at the end of the webinar to go through some of those questions. So our topic today is the New York invasive species tiers, in particular, the new online table that Dylan Finley and NYNHP have developed. Before I turn it over to Dylan, I believe Jennifer Dean with the New York National Heritage Program has a brief thing to say about how the species tiers will be maintained and updated in the future.
Great, thanks, Mitch. And it might have made more sense for a conference that's happening right now. So I'm going to have to jump off and present in another conference here in just a little while, along with Mitch and Meg are also going to have to jump off. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about, how Dylan's project is going to live on and how we're going to keep maintaining this, for our state partners to be using. And if you're, hopefully most of you got to watch that presentation a couple hours ago that Dylan just gave for the statewide PRISM network. And for those of you who have worked on these tier lists, you know that these lists are meant to be dynamic. So as new data comes in or species are reassessed, the tier lists are going to change, or the tiers for a particular species. And so our goal here at the Natural Heritage Program is to keep this table updated to match the PRISM's current
message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
And as you can imagine, keeping this table updated to match the PRISM's current tier list is, of course, challenging because lots of people have lots of things going on. And, we want to make sure that what's on this site reflects what's on the PRISM's websites. And so the Heritage Program will be updating the actual master spreadsheet behind the online table that you're going to see. And the PRISM staff will need to inform us when a species needs to change tiers and or be added or removed. And so we will create a change request form for the PRISMs to fill out. And for species that are newly added or shifting, say, to a higher tier due to new locations being found, we'll request that data is entered into IMAP, kind of going along with that theme, we need the data to be able to show these and do the analysis on them. And then in that form, you'll indicate which records were added to indicate, that shift in the species. And to help with this process each year, and to help guide the PRISMs, we're going to annually replicate Dylan's GIS process to produce those data tiers for each PRISM. And that'll be probably in the winter time, so after the field season data has come in, and we'll highlight species that have changed due to new data being entered. And this will just be provided as a resource for the PRISM staff to use, with their partners to determine whether or not they want to decide to change a tier. And then if they think that a species warrants a tier change, they'll fill in the change request form and then we'll get it updated. So, we're still working through that process. And for those of you who are involved in the PRISMs and these tiered lists, we'll be reaching out to you to kind of, make that as smooth as possible. And hopefully this is a really valuable resource for everyone. Dylan's done a great job, actually putting that all this GIS work and the research into a usable product. So I hope you all enjoy it. And with that, I turn it over to Dylan.
Thank you, Jen. That was a very nice introduction, and it makes me forgive you for bailing out on my presentation early, along with pretty much the whole IMAP team here. So, but thank you, and I just want to make sure that everybody who contributed to this is properly recognized. Jen has played a huge part in developing this online tier table, and John Marino, who's also on the call, basically, built the thing itself. So it's been a collaborative effort. I just want to make that clear. So over the course of this presentation, I'm going to, well, it's not really a presentation, it's more of a workshop. I'm going to show you two main things. Let me share my screen here. Oh, and look at that, I can't share my screen. Well, that might be important. Can somebody allow me to share my screen?
You do have co-host. Maybe I'll stop sharing. Maybe that'll let you.
Nope, still grayed out.
I'll turn you into the presenter.
Okay. Okay, now I can share. Awesome.
Thanks for the patience, everyone.
Okay, so in this presentation, I'm going to show you two things. The first is going to be this online tier table that Jen was talking about. And the second thing is going to be this story map on arcgis.com, which catalogs the entire process for creating these tiers and the background behind it. So we're going to get to that first. We're going to get to that second. First, we're going to talk about the tier table. I just want to make sure that everybody knows how to get to these things if you're looking for them. So if you want to find these resources, the way to go to it is newyorkimapinvasives.org. You can then go to Data and Maps, Species Tiers and Prioritization, and you can see the links to both the story map and the tier table. So we're going to talk about the tier table first. Don't need it open twice. Okay. So this tier table shows every single non-native species in New York State and within a buffer of the state that is currently being managed or monitored by at least one of the prisms. That's the scope for everything that you'll see in here. And so the structure of this is that for each species, we have a common name, a scientific name, the species type, whether it's a terrestrial plant, animal, aquatic animal or plant or microorganism, and then its invasiveness rankings. These are based on assessments done by the DEC, which catalogs species' ecological impacts and their socioeconomic impacts. And then after that, we have every single tier for each of the prisms and for the state of New York. So I think that it would probably be briefly useful here for me to just talk about what each of these tiers are. And this is a brand new feature here that John just added in. So as a brief overview, for those of you who are not familiar with the tier system, tier 1 species are those which are not present in the region itself, but are within a buffer. And those are broken down into 3 further subcategories based on how far away they are. Tier 2 species are those that are low abundance in the region itself and have high impacts with the goal of eradication. Tier 3 are those that are medium abundance in the region with a management goal of containment. Tier 4 with a really high abundance and more of a management goal of local control. And then Tier 5 are ones that we're just kind of monitoring them, we're researching them because we don't know exactly how invasive they're going to be. Another couple categories here for those of you who are familiar with the tiers but might be less familiar with these terms. Untiered species are those present in the prism or the region that don't really have high impacts. They're more non-native species with low or moderate impacts. And then buffer species are the same deal as those untiered species, low impacts, but they're not in the region itself. They're in a buffer region around it. Finally, if a species is blank in a prism, that means that it is neither in the prism itself nor in a buffer around it. So I know that was a lot of information, but I just want to make sure everybody has like a general understanding of which each of these tiers are. So you can control in this table, you can control the table through these filter boxes up here. Whatever you want to see, you can decide how you're going to present it using these filters. And then if you want to order it in a certain way, you can click on these drop-down arrows here, which will change how the order is being presented to you. You can also search through the table for species, for tiers, and you can show a different number of entries on the page if you want to see everything at once or if you want to restrict your frame to just a few species at a time. And most cool of all, if you want to see the distribution of any of these species in IMAP Invasives, all you have to do is click on it and it'll take you to a new tab that shows you the species distribution in IMAP across New York State. So I just love that. It's really fun for me. Back to the table though. There are, let's count them up. There are 837 entries in this table. That's how many species are being monitored or managed by at least one prism. If you really want to, you can go through the entire list and see everything that's in here. But I think that a more useful way to use this table is to refine your search based on what you're interested in. So let's start with the most basic type of search. You're in a prism and you want to see what species are being managed across your prism. So can I get one prism? Whoever puts it in the chat box first, that's the one that we're going to go with here. Any prism will do. Let me go to the chat. Okay. Hold on, I'm having a hard time finding the chat.
The first prism in the chat is the Capital Region prism.
Capital Region prism. Awesome. Okay. So if I just want to see something that is in the Capital Region prism, I'm going to deselect all of the geographies here and then just select CRP. That's the abbreviation for the Capital Region prism. So this list is going to include everything that is within Capital Region prism or within a 100-mile buffer of it. At the end of the list are also all of those species that are not in the Capital Region prism, but we stuffed them way at the bottom so it doesn't muddle the returned search here. So if among these species, though, you only want to see species that are actively being managed or monitored in this prism, you could go to the tier value filter over here and deselect everything that isn't species tiers 1, 2, 3, or 4. So I'm going to deselect these guys. And now the list is considerably shorter here. How many species are going to be in here? Now there's only 217 species that come up because these are the ones that have a priority tier in the Capital Region prism. So from here, let's say you wanted to whittle it down even further to just species that are being actively managed in the prism itself. So we're going to take out the tier 1 species, and now it's just tier 2 through 4. So, okay, we're going to keep whittling this search down. Let's say now that you are interested in maybe some particulars of the Capital Region prism. These ecological rankings here show species that were assessed by the DEC, and generally, a species is given a high priority tier if its impact ranking is high or very high between the ecological and socioeconomic categories. However, not every prism goes by these guidelines, and sometimes prisms decide that a species which is only moderately ranked should be tiered as a priority because it is behaving differently in that region. So let's say we wanted to look at just species that have a moderate ecological impact rank. So I'm going to use this bar here to scroll to sort by ecological impact rank. And I'm going to scroll down now to those moderate species, which are all neatly lined up in a row. So let's say that among these moderate species, you want to know how many are being given a tier 2, which is the highest priority ranking for a prism. It looks like it's actually already sorting by that second, but if it wasn't, the way that you could add multiple sorts to a search is by holding down the shift key and then clicking on this button here. So now you can see this is sorted first and this is sorted second. So if you want multiple sorts in this, like an advanced sort, you got to use the shift key to do that. So now I can see that there are how many species here? Looks like about 10 species that have a moderate impact in the Capital Region prism, but which are being given a very high priority ranking of tier 2. Okay, so that's one example of how you can use this. Let's see how we can use the search bar here. So please, somebody give me one invasive species, either its common name or its scientific name. And we're going to see how it's tiered across the state. Mitch, I'm going to rely on you to tell me what the first one in there is because I'm having a hard time finding the chat.
Let's go with Phragmites.
Phragmites, okay. If I type in Phragmites here, I can now see how every single prism is tiering Phragmites across the state. Basically, everybody is giving it a tier 4 with the exception of one prism. So you can see here that this is one of those species that has almost unanimous agreement in it being a very high abundance species across the state. Let's get another species, maybe something a little less known, a kind of a newcomer maybe. That would be cool.
How about one person put jumping worm?
Jumping worm. Okay. So
Japanese tree lilac is another option too.
Japanese tree lilac. Okay, we'll get to that one after this. So yeah, we can see here that Japanese jumping worm, this is an interesting one. It is really different across the state. APIP is giving it a tier 3. Western New York is giving it a tier 3. But in other places, its invasiveness is a little bit more in question. SLELO, the state of New York, and the capital region all giving it a tier 5. It is not present at all, apparently, in the data in CRISP or the Finger Lakes, and it is not even in the buffer for Lower Hudson, interesting enough. So, yeah, it's interesting to see the differences among these prisms here. And what was the last one? Japanese tree lilac?
Yes.
Did rank in the Lower Hudson. I think we did rank that. So that might just be a data thing that we need to correct.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I was wondering why that wouldn't have been in the buffer there, because it is within 100 miles of Lisma. So, okay. Tree lilac. Okay, here it is, Japanese tree lilac. So, yep, we can see also some differences across the state here. Some places are giving it, a pretty high priority tier ranking. It looks like it's a little bit more abundant in the Finger Lakes, and not really present at all in SLELO in the data. So this is, you can search for any species in the table here by its scientific name or its common name. You can also search for a specific tier if you want to see every single species that belongs to a tier in at least one of the prisms. So if I wanted to see every single tier 2 species that has a tier 2 in at least one prism, all I have to do is type in the number 2 there. There was a little bit of discussion earlier about the parameters of this search and if it works when you just restrict the search to a specific prism. But in my testing of this, it looks like if you search in the search bar for a tier and you have all the prisms selected, it will work. So this is here a comprehensive list of every single species that is being given a tier 2 ranking across the entire state. And there are 174 of them. When I say across the entire state, I mean by at least one prism across the entire state. So we're going to do another one here. Let's propose a problem. Let's say that we want to compare a species, we want to compare species of a certain species type between 2 neighboring prisms to see how they're being ranked. So can I get a species type? One of these up here. What's the first one that we're going to get?
I'll let you know when we see something. Aquatic animal.
Aquatic animal, great. And can I get 2 neighboring prisms, ones that are right next to each other? This is now relying on some geographic knowledge of the prisms here.
CRISP and Lower Hudson.
CRISP and Lower Hudson, great. So as you can see here, I deselected everything except for aquatic animal, deselected everything except for these. And let's say that I am only interested in these 2 through 4 species. Now, here's where I'm going to intentionally make a mistake. If I select tier 2, 3, and 4 from this tier value box, I get this message that pops up. Select only one geography filter when filtering by tier value. The reason that this pops up is because if I were to try and filter down these species to only ones that are tier 2, 3, and 4 using this filter, it's going to only give me species that have a tier 2, 3, and 4 across the geographies that I have selected. So for instance, any species that maybe is a tier 3 in CRISP, but happens to be an untiered or a tier 1 in Lower Hudson, that is not going to be represented here. So a better way to search for the tier values is to just do it by sort here. So I'm going to assume that I'm in CRISP and I'm interested in comparing my aquatic invasive animal rankings to the neighboring Lower Hudson Prism. So I'm going to go down here and look and see how things are different between CRISP and the Lower Hudson. And I can see that there are a few species here that are tier 2 that are being tiered differently in Lower Hudson. So I can see that quagga mussel is a tier 2 in CRISP, but only a tier 1 in Lower Hudson. Oriental weatherfish is a tier 3, but only a tier 2 in Lower Hudson. So this is an interesting way to directly compare how species are different across the prisms. Any questions at this stage here? Is there anything about this that somebody would like a little bit more information about how to use, or another tool that somebody might want to know more about? I want to just get some questions covered here before I move on to the next portion of the story map.
I don't think there are any questions about using the table specifically.
Okay. So
Dylan and Mitch, I'm madly typing, but I'll just chime in instead.
Okay.
So there was a question about the update and the lag and the coordination with the prism lists and the entire process. So I'll just reiterate, as Jen mentioned at the top of the call, the New York Natural Heritage Program staff will rerun the GIS work for this once a year, likely in the first quarter of each year. If there are changes that need to be made in that in-between time, then that form that Jen mentioned will be applicable. So submitting a change request form, and then that's a great question. How often? We'll probably do those quarterly. I don't think that's something that if you ask on a Monday, we would do on a Tuesday. So we'll probably collect the change request forms and then maybe quarterly do any of those important updates. And as Jen mentioned, that form will require that that new data has been entered into IMAP, because we want to make sure that that loop is always a feedback. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Those are good points there. Okay, so let's say, all right, so we know what the tier table looks like now. We know how to use it. But if you're just coming to this for the first time, then you might not know why we have these tiers to begin with, and what the whole context for this process is. There is a brief sentence here about to generate tiers for hundreds of invasive species, we devised a new method that combines data from IMAP invasives with invasiveness assessments and expert feedback. But what is that new method? Well, if you click on this link here, it'll take you to a story map that I created that is a guide to the entire tiering process here. And so if you scroll through this story map, you can not only read about the tiering process and the background on it, you can also look at some cool photos, some illustrations that I created, and some interactive maps where you can play around and learn about that methodology. So I'm just going to give an overview of what is the content of this story map. I'm not going to directly read from it, but I'm going to go slowly so that y'all can see what's going on in here and give some context for each section. It starts off with a table of contents and some background. A lot of these links are clickable here, so if you wanted to skip to a certain section, you could click on this and it'll take you to that part of the text. Maybe you're not interested in the whole background, you just want to get into the methods. So there's that option. It then moves into some background on the PRISM network and the origins of the tiers, referencing the invasion curve along the way. And I should also mention here that, as I said, some of these maps are pretty interactive here. So if, for instance, you want to find out more about one of these prisms, you can click on it and it'll have a link where you can go directly to the PRISM website. And so, as I mentioned before, the invasion curve is a big part of how species were tiered. And so I have some background on this. And then I talk about how the different invasive species tiers relate to the invasion curve. And then I go in a little bit of a different direction here. Then there's a story that I wrote about a toad that I used as a case study to explain how a species could move between the tiers over time. It's a very large toad. It is an agricultural pest of potatoes. I need to be very clear here that this is a fictional toad. I don't want people running into the woods thinking that some giant toad is coming after them in some like Orson Welles War of the Worlds situation. My advisors were very clear on this, that I need to be explicit. This is not a real toad. Over the course of this story, you will see some maps showing the toad's march towards New York and its eventual takeover of the state, becoming a tier 4 species. These are fake maps with fake data points that I put in. These are not real observations of the toad that people have seen. Okay, just needed to get that out of the way. But anyway, in this story, I show how a species might have become a tier 5 initially when it was unknown how its invasiveness was going to play out. As it became more invasive over time and moved further north, it fell into that 100-mile buffer around the state and became a tier 1 species. Then it started popping up in the Lower Hudson Prism in New York as a tier 2 species that needed eradication. But little did we know that it was a tunneling species which could survive for very long periods of time underneath the ground, and it went undetected for some time, fooling managers into thinking that it was eradicated when it actually wasn't. And then it popped up and became a tier 3 species that we could only hope to contain. But unfortunately, that didn't work either, and it wound up becoming a tier 4 species that overtook the entire region. So that's just a brief overview of the story of the toads, the Jutenheimen potato toads, as I call them. And I hope you all have a chance to read this, because it's a fun story. So most of this at this point has been exposition on the origins of the tiers, their reason for being. But at this point, then the story map goes into the actual background for the tiers. I mean, the actual methodology themselves and the reason for why we needed to transfer the tiers from being a more subjective approach to one that incorporated more data, was more consistent across the network, and had more transparency to it as well. So you can go through the methods here, see an overview, and then see the actual step-by-step construction of how the data tiers were created. It starts off with collecting populations from IMAP invasives, bringing them into ArcMap, applying a separation distance, which took species observations within 100 meters of each other and condensed them into single populations. Talk about some of the different types of species records available in IMAP invasives and how they were incorporated differently. And I then go through showing some examples of how these tier lists look, the ways that they were constructed, what their appearance was. I then also talk about these tier 1 species. I know this looks like a little Pac-Man attacking the Long Island Prism right now, but this is what it looks like when we're taking into account species that are within a 100-mile buffer around the prism. So that is every single invasive species within 100 miles of Long Island cataloged in IMAP invasives. So more tier lists here showing examples of how we created these lists, what they looked like. And then I talk about the expert tier process, how experts contributed to these tiers, the sort of feedback that we got from them, the different reasons that experts could give for disagreeing with a data tier, and the reasoning for why we wanted the experts to be involved in this process and why we wanted to be structured in such a kind of regimented way. So that is basically it for the content of this story map here. I conclude on a little bit of a hopeful note. And I think that the whole impetus for this story map was to increase the transparency of the tiering process and raise awareness about ways that we could be smarter in our invasive species prioritization. I think that we came up with a pretty smart and efficient way to do this, and the story map is a great way to read about it in like a fun, interactive way. So I hope that you all come back and check in on this and read it in full at some point. And my ultimate hope is that this methodology that we came up with is adopted not just across New York State, but across other states as well. So feel free to share it with people from out of state, and hopefully they'll catch on to the good ideas we got going on over here. So that is it for my overview of this story map. And yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions on it or the tier table. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much for that overview, Dylan. That was great.
Thank you, Mitch.
So people can feel free to enter questions, comments, things they're wondering if you can do with the table.
Yeah, all that. Let me actually get the table open back up here again.
I'm not seeing anything yet.
Okay.
People can also, if you're having trouble with the chat, you could unmute yourself to ask a question verbally.
Yep.
One quick thing that others on the call may be interested in, when you showed Dylan the map of, it looked like Lisma with 100-mile buffer.
Yeah.
Could you just refresh people where some of that external data, or where, you know, some of that information might be coming from?
Yeah, let me find it here again. Okay, so yeah, this data was not just based off of IMAP observations. To get those tier 1A data points, we actually got from a couple other databases, including the EDMAPS database and the non-indigenous aquatic species database, NATS. So yeah, a few data sources went into this. In the first version, we only relied for New York State species observations on IMAP data. In the second version, as you might have heard me talk about during the PRISM call, if you were on that, we used iNaturalist data as well, research grade iNaturalist data. So it was kind of a lengthy process to combine all of these different data sources together, especially for species that had different scientific names. And I had to like go manually through this list and merge any species that had different scientific names, but were actually the same species. So yeah, quite a lot of work. Was that kind of what you were asking about, John?
Yep. Yeah, it's impressive, all that taxonomy. That's
yeah,
a lot to merge.
Okay,
yeah.
I had one question,
sure.
and I might have answered it for myself by using that question mark button. You have more information, but I was looking at how there's both an untiered and blank option. So maybe if you could just emphasize that.
Sure.
And show
Yeah.
people where they can show themselves that when they forget, like I did.
Right. So yeah, this is a really useful little drop-down menu here. If you're interested in knowing the precise definitions for everything, it's good for me even to remind myself of the differences between some of these tiers sometimes. And a blank species means that it is literally just not recorded in the data in the PRISM or in the 100-mile buffer around it. That has no bearing on its management. It might be a high impact species, but it is just not present in that tier, in that PRISM. It's not in the buffer. Versus an untiered species is one that is in the PRISM itself, but is just not being managed because the PRISM there has decided it is a low impact species. It is not causing that much harm, and they're not going to focus their management efforts on it at all. So that's what the difference mainly comes down to. Does that clear it up, Mitch?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So in addition to any questions that you might have here, I don't know if anybody has any other ways of thinking about using the tier table that I didn't show. I feel like there's probably some other different types of queries that you could do in here that I didn't go through, but I hope that other people find new innovative ways to use this tier table to narrow down their searches the way that they're for whatever they're looking at. I don't know if anybody has any suggestions on that, but that would be definitely interesting if you did.
Yeah, definitely put those in the chat if anyone has those. And we got one question from Donna Vogler. This might be for John might have thoughts on this, but her question is, once someone makes a nice filtered list that they filtered down and want to work with, how can they get that list in a spreadsheet or something so that they can save that list?
Yeah, so I could jump in real quick. We don't quite have an export feature right now. However, one simple thing that will work is to actually select what you see in the table and just simply copy it and paste it into Excel. And because of the structure of the table, that will translate very nicely into cells, in Excel. So that should transfer into Excel pretty well. You could potentially try saving the page as a PDF, like if you're in Chrome.
Do you want to? I'm in Chrome right now, John. Is there an easy way to show people how to do that?
Yeah, if you go up to print, and unfortunately this isn't fully tested, so pardon any if this doesn't work very well. We'll work on it a little bit. Okay, that's not
okay. Yeah. I just don't know if will this only show the first page if I had everything selected. What if I did all entries here?
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to print. What will it show? Will it show everything now? Based on the loading time here, I have a feeling it's going to...
Yeah, it's popping up as 27 pages. So.
Yeah, okay. So, yep, that's a lot of ink. But
you may also want to flip to landscape if that's possible.
Okay. Let's see here. Would that be this one? No. How would I do this? I'm not sure. I don't think I see an option to do this in landscape.
Yeah, that's strange. But anyway, if you narrowed some things down, that might be another option you could.
Yeah.
And it looks like you may need to remove some prisms if you can't get landscape type thing. So.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You could try scaling as well. So.
Yep, that's true.
Options.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, any novel ideas on how to use the table would be great. Any thoughts on if there's anything you would like to see differently about this table here? Anything that you feel could be improved to help make these searches just more effective for you or tailored to your interests? All that information would be good. If an idea dawns on you later on today, you can always email us. Yeah.
I have one other thing I could share quickly. In that table, in that search table box, there's a special character you can use that's technically called a pipe character. It's kind of the vertical line that should be sort of at the right above your return key on your keyboard. And let's say you want to look up giant hogweed and kudzu at the same time and just show those. Try typing in hogweed and then put in kudzu after that.
Okay. Do I need a space in between, or does that not matter? It doesn't matter, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool.
So that could help you narrow down, or perhaps that might actually help with the invasiveness ranks as well. Like maybe if you wanted to just look at or like medium and high or something like that. That could.
Yeah, and then that might also be good for, let's say, if I wanted to just look at. Well, yeah. So this is a little bit more tricky here because then you get into the fact that socioeconomic ranks and ecological ranks sometimes have, share words here in their rankings. So that might be a little bit of a tricky approach, but it might be useful if you wanted to see like every species that was 2, 3, and 4 tiered. I think that would, let me see how many results you're getting here with that. Yeah, 328 species. So this is now going to show you every species that has a 2, 3, or a 4 somewhere in the state. So that could be a very useful query right there. Thank you for mentioning that, John. I forgot about that part. Okay, well, Mitch, are there any other questions in the chat, or does it seem like everything's pretty straightforward to folks here?
Aaron just had a comment that shift trick to do secondary sorting is very useful. So she suggests maybe at some point there could be a note on that somewhere, or some tips.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea, like tips and
yeah. And I think that this could also be included in a tip sheet as well. Because that's definitely not obvious at this point. So yeah, I think that we were talking at some point about putting together like a little flyer that would help explain some of these processes here, but it might be good to include this in I don't know where it would be in the table, but somewhere so that people can reference that information. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. That's a good idea.
Yes, I'm not seeing any more questions. I'll put our email in the chat box. If anyone has something that comes up later, nope, I spelled that right. Okay, good. Well, thank you for attending, everyone. Thank you so much, Dylan, for presenting and for all of the incredible work you've been doing. With that, I will stop the recording.
Okay, thank you so much, man.